Our next speaker is Bob LaPrelle from the USA. The talk will be conducted by Manikandan Ramanan. Since we had introduced him yesterday, I won't go into a detailed introduction again, but I would like to mention that he's a very active member of the Rail Enthusiast Society. And among his other interests, he is a voracious reader and collector of books on many disciplines. Disciplines like railroading, rail technology, rail management, locomotives, rail signaling, etc. He also has interest in things like Indian and Greek philosophy, Indian classical music, military and industrial history, with special reference to the United States. I would also like to mention that among the comments and questions that have come, the maximum have come from him in this conference. He is currently employed in a senior position with an MNC. He is also the director of WhatTrain and represents India on this organization. So, Mani, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh, and thank you very much for giving us this opportunity once again. And I would also like to thank Bob for consenting to join us so early. It's around 5:30 a.m. for him. So first of all, thank you very much, Bob. It's indeed a pleasure to have you with us. Yeah, it gives us great pleasure, and it's an honor for me to introduce Mr. Bob LaPrelle, who is the CEO of the Museum of the American Railroad at Frisco in Texas. He has been instrumental in ensuring that his museum is among the best in the United States, with its holistic focus on exhibits and artifacts, miniature railways, joyrides, educational programs, and community support. We already saw Mr. Baratora covering museums in the Northeast and in the Southwest United States. So now, as a continuum, we're going to see a museum in the southern part of the country. So he has ensured that the emphasis is on cultural history, technology of railroading in general, and rail museums in particular, and has ensured that the wider role of railroads in the US, social and industrial history is appreciated. He has a lot of feathers in his cap. So he successfully led the effort to move his museum to a larger venue in Frisco. He has overseen significant expansion in its collection and its outreach programs to a wider audience. Might I mention that this outreach education programs also includes the outreach to the Indian and the significant Indian American population in Texas, of which we will be collaborating in the future to provide them with more information and positive statistics and achievements of the Indian Railway network. You will see shortly that his museum is now undergoing another round of expansion with new facilities, which will be covered in his PPT. Bob LaPrelle attended the University of Texas at Austin, majoring in government and public policy. He's a fan of the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Administration, which he credits to his impressive skills in stakeholder management. Might I add that his was one of the very few museums in the US that got federal funding and support during the pandemic. He also double hats as the president of the HeritageRail Alliance in the US and was past president of the Association of Railway Museums. He chairs the museum advocacy and the practice committee, and he is also the vice president of the UK-based WhatTrain. So Bob, over to you. And let me just share my screen.
Okay.
Right. So
All
let
right.
me know if my screen is visible.
Yes, looks like it's working okay. Can everybody hear me?
Visible.
Start the
presentation.
Start the presentation.
Okay. Well, thank you very much
Yes.
for having the opportunity to address your organization. Thank you to Manny and Mr. Singh. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you today. Just want to give you a brief overview before I get into the presentation, the slide presentation. We are a very mission-driven museum. We place a high emphasis on preservation, but also community service. We believe that the community will support us if we support the community. There's a reciprocity there, and I think that's a formula for a successful museum. So we place a high emphasis on that. And we're very passionate about education. We work very closely with the schools in the areas, and I will talk about that as we get further down into the program. As Manny mentioned, we are very much about the history and the technology of the railroad. in the social, cultural, and technical aspects of railroads. We think railroads contributed very heavily to the American life and the development of America, and its sort of rise to a prominence in manufacturing and its effects around the world. Our collection is national in scope. We're not regional. We're not local. We really cover all of the nation and the effects of the railroad, and that is seen in the scope of our collection that you'll see shortly. And we're not just about the nuts and bolts. We do talk about the human side of railroading and the people that worked on the railroad, as well as the people that the railroad served, both in passenger and freight operations. We're also not just about the history, we're about today and tomorrow. We talk about the technology, the progression of technology, and how railroads can solve logistical issues in the future worldwide. And we place an emphasis on career paths and research into railroads in the future. So that's a big part of what we do. So let's jump into the PowerPoint presentation. Manny I'm going to kind of take, he's going to take my cues. So Manny, if you want to move on to the next slide, we will start the presentation. All right, very good. So we've been around for 60 years. We were chartered in 1962 and the museum opened in 1963. So we're actually coming up on our 60th anniversary this year. We are a nonprofit organization. That is our tax status, which I'm sure you understand means that we can benefit from certain tax incentives for people to contribute to the museum, both in kind and in financial gifts. Okay, next one. There we go. And I've kind of touched on our mission already, but it really is about people. The trains are a fantastic asset to our museum. We view them as cultural assets, but without the stories and without the people behind them, they really don't have near as much of an impact when you endeavor to preserve them. Okay, next. So our founders were two very prominent people in Dallas, Texas, here in the U.S. On the left is Everett DeGolyer Jr. He comes from a family of oil barons, so to speak. The DeGolyer family made quite a fortune in the research and production of oil in Texas and throughout the nation. And his philanthropic efforts really were the power behind the start of our museum back in the early 1960s. And then the image to the right, that's Joseph Rucker Jr. He was president and general manager of the State Fair of Texas, which is where our museum was located for a number of years, which provided the space and the financing and the impetus to start a collection of preserved steam era trains with the opening of the fair in 1963. Okay, next. So we had very modest beginnings with the 63 State Fair of Texas. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the fair, but it is somewhat of a cultural phenomenon in and of itself. It was located in Dallas. It's still held every year. It's a 120 some odd year old institution, and we have it's kind of an icon called Big Tex that's been as part of the fair for the last almost 70 years. This one's almost scary. This is the 1962 version of Big Tex. And then the center image is a very modest entrance to our museum in the first few years of operation. Of course, the price is quite fair at that point. Okay, next. So for nearly 50 years, our museum, which was known at that time as the Age of Steam exhibit, was crammed into a very small space on the periphery of the State Fair grounds. And as you can see, the trains almost look like animals trapped in a pen. And we added to the collection over the years and just completely filled that small space, which only was about 1.8 acres. And it was a very tight space within to do the operations as it grew over the years. Okay, next.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the early 2000s. This is a view from the other end of the museum. clearly, it was not the most attractive venue to have an exhibit of trains. The buildings to the far left are some of the original buildings of the State Fair of Texas that were built around 1900, and we were located behind them in kind of a remote area of the fairgrounds. Now, we were open all year long at this point, but the fair was still really our big revenue generator and our largest period during the year for visitation. The fair itself did about 2 million visitors per year in a 24-day cycle. We only saw maybe 10,000, maybe 12,000 of those people each year. So clearly something had to be done. The collection was still owned by the State Fair of Texas, but as time went on, they placed less of an interest on the exhibit. And our organization literally started as a volunteer group to work at this exhibit. And as time went on, the State Fair would eventually quit claim the collection to us legally. It became we became the owners, and we found ourselves running a museum rather than just an enthusiast organization. So clearly something had to change in the way we approached the stewardship and the operation of this exhibit. Next. So we hired a full-time person starting about 1986, and that was done for a couple of reasons. One, we knew that we had to have somebody on site and somebody working full-time to manage this exhibit and to plan for its future. And the other was we were also going to be featured as an attraction during the sesquicentennial and some of the other celebrations for the state of Texas and for the U.S. So we wanted to have a large presence there. So that led to increased admission and adding to the collection and becoming much more of a professional organization rather than just, kind of an enthusiast group. We wanted to actually be a museum, a professional museum that was mission driven in how we approached our collection and its presentation. So we created a document called Visions back in 2006, and that was developed in-house by the staff, and it really it's online. You can still look at this document at our website, historictrains.org. But we really raised the bar on what we wanted to do, what we wanted to be as a cultural destination and a museum and a preservation organization. It was very forward-thinking. It took into account standards in the museum industry, not just in railroad museums, but in museums in general, pulling mainly from the American Association of Museums. And that was actually throughout its content. So we really wanted to embrace the standards at the time and what we wanted our museum to be in the future. Okay, next. So the document took into account the history, the scope of our collection, and how it had grown to be a national collection, and not just steam era, but also diesel era. And it also looked at the type of structure we wanted to have in the way of a museum building and a cover over the rolling stock collection, which was a very high priority at that point, was to cover the collection. Some of the pieces had been on the fairgrounds longer than they had actually been in service, and they were aging, and there was a lot of deterioration from the Texas sun and the weather. So that was another high priority, is to not only have a magnificent edifice for people to enter and have a wonderful indoor facility for visitors, but also to cover the collection and protect it. Okay, next. So we got a very good response from Visions, and about a year later, almost a year later, in late 2006, we put out a request for proposals and hired a company to do a strategic plan for us. This was a very comprehensive plan. It took almost 6 months to execute. We hired a company called Goodwin Associates out of Los Angeles, California. And we talked to volunteers, board members, staff, and stakeholders throughout Dallas over those months to get feedback on what they wanted to see us accomplish, both inward and outward looking. It was a very important plan. And what I like to say about strategic plans, it's not only the end product, but it's also the process that is important to bring everyone together and to have one solid vision for everyone to buy into and support. And that is essential to support what we laid out for our future. So it was a wonderfully done plan. We still follow it. We do updates periodically. There was really good buy-in to it. And it's one of the best things we ever did was to do this strategic plan. It was really a roadmap. And I recommend that for all museums to do periodically. Even if they're successful, it's always good to look at to where you are and where you want to go to make sure everybody's on the same page. Okay, next. At the same time, we also, or just a little bit later, about a year later, we received some federal funding from the Office of Museum Services, which is a federal program under the Institute for Museum and Library Services. We received that funding to do what's called a collections assessment program. And that's to bring in someone from the outside, a third party, to look at your museum, to actually physically come to your site, look at your collection and see how it's being cared for. And they told us pretty much what we already knew, that we had a lot of work to do to save our collection if we wanted to get it into the 21st century and beyond. But it was good to have somebody from the outside to bring a fresh approach and fresh ideas. It was also a very important tool to take to funders to say, here is what we need, and here's an outside party that recommends this. It gave a lot of weight to future fundraising and capital projects. Okay. So the other thing we had to do, and this was the most difficult and painful part of sort of jettisoning our museum into the present and into the future, and that was to change our governance. Our governance had fallen way behind, and if we were going to achieve the goals in the strategic plan and the collections assessment plan and what we wanted to do as an organization, we had to change our governance because we were still stuck more into an enthusiast organization that wanted to come once a month and have meetings and look at slides. Now, I'm not downing that. I'm not saying that was a bad thing, but it was not appropriate. It was not going to get us where we needed to go as a museum. We had to show the community that we had much more to offer if we were going to get the kind of outside support that we needed. So we had to look inward a lot. We had to ask some tough questions, and we had to make some very difficult decisions if we were going to get that kind of outside support. So we changed our bylaws, and that took almost 3 years and 2 votes and a lot of there was a lot of acrimony within the organization. It was not easy. We thought we could get everyone to buy in through some simple votes and get there, but we had to also, as it turns out, we had to drag some people kicking and screaming. A lot of my gray hair is a result of some of those efforts, but it was the right thing to do. We finally had enough votes on the board and enough support to do it. But it was the most painful part of our transition. But it was the right thing to do, and it literally put us on a trajectory of the successes that we enjoy now. So finally, we had good buy-in. All right, so enter Frisco. They went online. They wanted to celebrate their past, and this town was started by the St. Louis-San Francisco Railroad in 1902. It was literally just a water stop. And the railroad decided if they're going to stop a train there was an opportunity for commerce. So they bought all the land around the water stop, which was next to a creek, and they platted a town. This town has grown by leaps and bounds, and they wanted to celebrate their heritage, and they actually wanted to establish a railroad museum in the town of Frisco. So they cold called us after seeing our strategic plan executive summary online, and we met with them. We had already been successful in a bond campaign in the city of Dallas, and basically told them we already had plans for our future in Dallas, but we would certainly hear what they had to say. And they made a pitch to us that was just overwhelming, and it was something that we just could not pass up on. So we basically abandoned our plans in the city of Dallas and signed a development agreement and lease to move the entire museum collection to Frisco, which by rail was 60 miles. As the crow flies, it was about 35, 40 miles. So it was going to be a massive undertaking to move our museum, both physically and to change the culture of our organization, to move to a community and start all over from scratch in some ways. Okay. So this is just the first page of the development agreement and lease that we signed with the city of Frisco in April of 2008. And we had embarked on an unbelievably complicated and ambitious project to move this museum and reestablish it in a community in North Texas. Okay. So we were going to be a part of a much larger commercial, residential, entertainment complex within the city. It was ambitious even for them, but the city of Frisco was riding high on some tax revenue from a large shopping mall that they had established several years earlier. So they had the tax revenue to help fund a lot of these projects, including ours. They gave us about 14 acres within a very busy development area within the city, and they gave us $1 million in seed money to establish basic infrastructure to get the museum started under construction, mainly trackage to accommodate our collection once it moved up from Fair Park in Dallas. So we were within a very large, complex, very ambitious project. We weren't just one entity. We were going to be part of a much larger partnership of cultural tourism destination, education and city cultural and business and commercial and retail development. Okay, next. So our site, as you can see on the center of the screen here, started out as about 12.3 acres. It actually grew a little bit because we needed more space as our track geometry was sort of superimposed on the site. It was clear that we were going to need a little bit more space for what we call transitional trackage and tail trackage. We were next to a very large building that was being repurposed from an industrial building to a cultural building, which ultimately ended up with 3 other cultural organizations, as well as a public library that was operated by the city. This is a view taken very early on before any development was done on the site, right after the city bought this industrial facility. It is completely different now. It's totally built out. I wish I had a view of it today, but unfortunately we don't have anything current. But everything you see here has been completely built out. It's just amazing. Okay, next. So we hired a company out of Australia called Freeman Ryan Design to take our strategic plan and our vision and start sort of superimposing that into that 12.5 acre site. So we began to flesh out what we thought would be track infrastructure in our main buildings, and then a visitor flow pattern. Okay, next. So these are literally notes that we jotted down in initial meetings with Freeman Ryan, who was a very creative organization that has done some fantastic museums all over the world. They've done some work in York for that railroad museum, and their specialty is actually aviation museums and large industrial items. We were one of the first railroad projects. Okay, keep going. So as the sketches began to morph into something a little more concrete, you can see that basically what we were starting to end up with was a railway terminal design, not unlike what was already out there. It started to serve what we needed in the way of exhibition, and the red lines that crisscross each other, those are visitor flow patterns. They're very big on that when they start doing spatial design, and how that would fit into a railway terminal design as part of our main museum outlay. Okay. So we took those sketches and worked with an engineering firm starting about 2009 that we are still working with today. They've been with us every step of the project. It's Lunsford Associates. It's a civil engineering firm that specializes in the construction of railway facilities. And as you can see, those sketches morphed into something much more defined. And this is the 16th iteration of about 3 months of trying to design something that worked for the site and fit into what Freeman Ryan was recommending in spatial design. Okay. So we took that initial layout and created a very comprehensive document in 2010, which was the actual construction plans for the Museum of the American Railroad. And this is a very comprehensive 25-year full build out of the museum facility, including all of the civil engineering and the placement of all the structures, the footprint of all the main buildings, which takes into account not only the road infrastructure, but the visitor flow patterns and the spatial design. It's multiple pages. It has been approved by the City of Frisco's Planning and Zoning Department, their engineering, public works, fire, every department of the city. It's all been approved. Everybody signed off on it, and it was time to go to work. Okay. So as you can see, what developed from just a few sketches has turned into the entire layout and build out of the museum. Again, it takes into account everything. It sort of it has the main buildings, all the footprints. It even allows for a future roundhouse and turntable. Now, this is a phased project. We're in phase 2 right now. Phase 1 was just to get some of the initial track in so we could accommodate our collection and get it moved to Frisco, which we successfully did. We're now into what we call phase 2B, which is the completion of all the track and infrastructure. We had to put in a lot of subterranean improvements, which you'll see just in a moment. But this is the full build out. There's really just about everything is addressed. Okay, so we'll kind of add in everything on top of that now. Okay, go ahead, Manny, that's good. So the other thing we wanted to do was to get the City of Frisco, their city council, their city government, their city manager's office, and everybody to buy into what this museum would look like when things started to come out of the ground. We wanted to have a structure that was period style and was a very impressive edifice, but was also affordable to build. So we looked at a lot of different railway stations throughout the United States to find something that kind of fit what Frisco was doing. This is Boston North Station. It was a collection of buildings that started around 1896. Sadly, they were all torn down in the 1920s to build a sort of a Coliseum. There's still a train station underneath it, but this magnificent building has been gone for years. But we really liked the looks of this building in its neoclassical style. Okay, next. And the reason we chose that building was because Frisco had actually used neoclassical architecture for some of their new buildings in their town square, and we wanted to complement what they were doing. These structures were built about 2002, 2003. And we thought that was a nice lead in for what we would do in our building is to follow that architectural style. The city council loved it. There was strong buy-in to do that. Okay. So we hired an architectural renderer to take the Boston North Station concept and sort of put it into what we would like to do in a museum building. And we actually went with that eclectic style of Boston North Station, where they had taken 3 different buildings built over a period of about 25 years and sort of connected them. We liked that eclectic approach. So we actually added that to what we wanted to do in the way of a main building. The building to the far left would be an educational facility. The centerpiece, the entrance, would be our main hall, and then the building to the right was going to be administration and other exhibits placement. So that morphed into more of a refined drawing. And now we've actually looked at some other designs over the years, but we're still pretty much staying with this design. This structure has not been built yet. We're still building critical infrastructure, but this is the vision. And here in the not too distant future, probably by the end of the year, we will actually launch a capital campaign to embark on raising funds to build this structure along with a train shed. Okay, go ahead. See how we're doing on time here. So let's move along a little more quickly. I wanted to give you a lot of background. Okay, go ahead, Manny. We'll keep moving along. So these are the visions of the interior space of what we're proposing. This is the back side of the building where it transitions into a concourse and into the actual exhibit tracks and train shed that will cover the collection. And there's a semicircular structure on the second floor there. That's actually a restaurant that we propose to build. We want a lot of public spaces. It's very important to have public spaces. We want to be a destination for the community and where they can have community events and so forth. And sometimes the trains will simply serve as a backdrop for community events, as well as just, general visitation and educational programs. Okay. And these are just some other views. These are actually early renderings that predate Frisco, showing how the trains would be put into the context of period style architecture, covering the trains and providing protection, but also being attractive and something that we could be proud of that kind of celebrated their history. Okay. Another idea for public spaces within the museum, where we can hold special events and so forth. Okay. So we had our groundbreaking all the way back in 2011. Gosh, I can't believe it's been that long ago, made up of stakeholders. So just to show you how many people are involved here, the gentleman to the far left that's dressed so well, that's our board chair at the time. And then all the way to the right is the superintendent of operations for BNSF Railway. So we had a lot of stakeholders involved in it. Okay. So the first order of business was to construct enough track on the site to accommodate our collection and move out of Dallas. And this in itself was very ambitious. The green line is the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, BNSF main line coming from Dallas. And then going off the image here to the bottom, it actually connects with the red lines, which is, there's a switch a little bit south of this off this page, but that connects with our brand new trackage that's all laid out in red. We call it the lead track and the runaround track. And that was about 2,300 feet. And that was just enough track to get everything out of Dallas and get us out of Fair Park and into Frisco, and then continue construction. Okay, go ahead. So work began in earnest. We had to do a lot of cut and fill on the land, moving a massive amount of earth, and also, pave it and put down roadbed for actual track. So we literally started with farmland. There was nothing there. Okay. And we were also on a 100-year floodplain, which required us to grade the site, and we had to put a 1% grade on the entire site so it would drain, and put in a huge network of underground drainage. This was a very expensive, complicated project so the site would drain, and that was really the first order of business was to get this drainage network in. It was built in phases as we laid track. Okay. Having a little difficulty there. Okay, there we go. So all of that was gathered and then went into a creek. And I can't overemphasize how much of a network we had to build and how much water had to be accommodated so the site would drain. But we finally got that in as part of that first phase. Okay. So then track construction began, and we can fly through these pretty quick, Manny. Those are all the cross ties just moved on site. Okay. And then track construction began. It was a huge labyrinth of switches and curves and tangent track. The image to the left there is the switch that was being cut into Burlington Northern Santa Fe's main line to make a permanent connection there to get our equipment onto this new site. Okay. So then came the move. We had to move 2 historic structures and 43 pieces of rolling stock, most of which had not moved in 40 or 50 years at the Fair Park site. A lot of that we had some fairly recent acquisitions, but most everything hadn't rolled in years. So this was a huge project, and our goal was to move everything on its own wheels. The first thing we did was move the two structures. This is known as Tower 19. This is an interlocking control tower that was in the southeastern sector of Dallas. It was moved to our facility at Fair Park in 1996, and then we had to take it apart and move it again to Frisco. We had a lot of height restrictions, so we had to literally slice it in half. This in and of itself would have been a massive project, but we had to move the entire museum. This was just one aspect of what we had to do in about a 2-year period. So this is actually taking it apart and getting ready to load it onto trucks at Fair Park. Okay. So here it is, ready to go. That was a very interesting move, and just nerve-wracking to take a historic structure like this apart. And it was never meant to come apart like this, but very delicately, and then move it all those miles up to Frisco. Okay. So here it is going back together, similar to the way it came apart. See, the company that did it did a fantastic job. It's all coming together. We had to reconstruct the concrete base for the tower. Then we had to move on and move our depot, which meant we had to take the roof off piece by piece to get it down to an acceptable height. This is on the State Register of Historic Structures, and we were able to actually maintain its landmark status even though we moved it to a different location. Tower 19 is on the National Register, so we had to follow some very strict guidelines on handling these historic structures and reconstructing them. Okay. Had to raise a traffic signal a little bit to get it underneath them on the highway. This move took about 13 hours to get it to Frisco. We could have driven all the way to almost to Kansas City by that time. This is actually coming into Frisco. All of the foliage that you see on the bogies behind the tower, those are tree limbs that were knocked off as we went through Dallas. And then reconstruction began, meticulously putting it all back together. Every roof truss was marked and put back in place. We had several rain events while it was, thank goodness it was covered. We did get a little bit of water inside of it. Okay. Going back together very delicately. The structure was built in 1900, so it was very frail. Okay. Let me know how I'm doing on time, Manny. And there's the finished product. And on to the next aspect of the move. Then the rolling stock. And we moved in 7 different moves. We had to get 6 federal waivers to get this equipment out on a mainline railroad with non-compliant brakes and other things. We had to move them with additional freight cars for braking. This is the first car coming into the museum. This is our Pullman built in 1926. Beautiful car. First piece to come onto the Frisco site. BNSF was absolutely fantastic to work with. Most of the move was over their line. It also involved about 5 other short line railroads, but BNSF was really the principal railroad that moved us. So good to work with. They moved every piece in our collection, put a switch in their main line, all at no charge. And this is the first crew taking our equipment up there on the first move. Okay. Just a couple of shots of equipment coming in. Our Santa Fe motor car M160 with our dining car in that Pullman that you saw in an earlier view. Those were the first 3 pieces to arrive in Frisco. The view to the right is one of the moves going past Reunion Tower and the Hyatt Hotel in downtown Dallas. Another couple of moves coming in. We got a lot of news media coverage as everything was arriving. We did move a few pieces by truck. This is a little industrial switcher being lifted onto a tractor trailer truck and being moved, is actually being set in place in Frisco. And then another move in downtown Dallas of our Pullman cars going past Reunion Tower. So it did have its challenges. This is a friction bearing to the right. As you can see, it melted the journal, the Babbitt material in the journal box. We had a couple of cars that had some journal failures. These just hadn't been out on the road in so long. We did inspect everything, but we had a few issues with the oiling of the journals. We had to rebrass a couple of journals en route on these cars, but we got them up there successfully. Couple other views of the move. This is our views of the move, our Santa Fe car coming into the Frisco site. These are all the lightweight cars, the cars built in the 50s. We did have to move 2 steam locomotives on flat cars. They were just non-compliant to the point where we couldn't move them on their own wheels. So this is a little Dallas Union Terminal switcher built in 1926. We had to lift it and set it onto a flat car. Okay. The other steam locomotive that we moved was what we call the Russian Decapod. This was a locomotive built by American Locomotive Company of Schenectady, New York. It was actually built for export to Russia, but the Bolshevik Revolution caused cancellation of the order in 1917. It was built to 5-foot gauge. It was regauged and ran in the United States for many years before being donated to our museum. That's 232,000 pounds suspended in the air. And we held our breath as they lifted that locomotive. We set it onto a flat car, and if you can see a little bit of a swale in that flat car from the weight of that locomotive. Okay. And then the 2 largest steam locomotives had to move separately in separate moves on their own wheels. This is our next to the largest locomotive in the collection, the Frisco Northern type locomotive number 4501, a beautiful engine. This is en route. This is, I think, around Irving, Texas, about halfway through the move, about 30 miles into the move. Okay. And last but not least, the big boy articulated locomotive number 4018, ex-Union Pacific. This was the last piece to move from Fair Park to Frisco. And we did that by design. One was we wanted everything else out of there in case there was a problem getting this monster over the rails and out of our museum to Frisco. We waited until everything else was out before we attempted this. And plus, it had the greatest fanfare and the greatest media coverage. It really gave us a big splash as part of the last piece moving in. The tank cars on either end of it are used for braking. Because the locomotive, the brakes were non-operational. So we had to put runaround air between those 2 sets of tank cars, which was just an air line to connect the 2. So you had train line air continuous all the way through the consist. Okay. So this is everybody associated with the big boy move on that fateful day. This was August of 2013. This completed the move. This is actually right after its arrival in Frisco. So you see a lot of people here. You see mechanical, you see operations people, a lot of our folks, plus BNSF's crews. The funny thing about this is the gentleman on the far left is the museum's attorney, and the gentleman on the far right is the superintendent of operations for that division for the BNSF Railway. So it really ran the gamut. Okay. So this, I just threw this in for grins. This is our volunteer staff after a very long, hot day of loading those steam locomotives onto a flat car. They were exhausted. We were all exhausted by the end of that particular day. Lots of work. Okay. So just real quick highlights of the collection. I know I'm kind of running long here. So Manny, you cut me off when you need to.
Can go take up to 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
I think, yeah.
So, okay. So we have a variety of pieces in our collection. This is a GG1 electric locomotive that came off the Pennsylvania Railroad, designed by Raymond Lowry, one of the great industrial designers. This particular locomotive pulled Robert Kennedy's funeral train in 1968, so it has quite a historic value to it. Okay. And of course, the big boy. We received this locomotive in 1965 as a gift of the Union Pacific Railroad. It's still the core piece in our collection. Most of you are probably familiar with the 4014, which was restored to operation by the Union Pacific Railroad and runs periodically now. They actually looked at our locomotive. It was the runner-up. as a candidate. While we were disappointed that they didn't take it and restore it back to steam, we're also happy that we still have it and it's still in Texas because it is a core piece in our collection. We're very proud of it. Okay. We have a very large presence of the Santa Fe Railway. The Santa Fe ran in Texas as part of its line, its system all over the Southwest, really between Chicago and Los Angeles. We arguably have the largest, most comprehensive collection of Santa Fe Railway rolling stock in the country. A lot of history behind it. We're very proud of it. We also have another superlative in the collection, which is the Union Pacific Centennial number 6913. This is the largest diesel-electric locomotive ever constructed in 1969 in celebration of the centennial of the first transcontinental railroad. It's another keystone piece in our collection. It's built by Electromotive Division of General Motors and has two V16 645 series engines on it. Beautiful locomotive. Okay. This is the oldest piece in the collection. This is a business car, an office car built for the Fort Worth and Denver Railway, which was a subsidiary of the Burlington Railroad, which was a predecessor of the BNSF Railroad today. This car is built by the Pullman Company in 1900 and is currently undergoing some roof repairs. It's a beautiful car. It has mahogany and cherry wood interior with staterooms, a dining room, office. It's a beautiful car. Oldest piece in our collection. This is probably the roughest piece in our collection. This is a Alco PA1 diesel electric locomotive built by GE, originally for Santa Fe. It was one of the two PA locomotives that was repatriated from the railways of Mexico, where they've served out their last years, brought back to the States. We are restoring this one, which was involved in an accident. It's a long-term project, but it is now in Frisco, and work is being done to it currently. Okay. There's what it will look like when it's completed with all new stainless steel skin and so forth. Beautiful locomotive. There's one of only two left. It'll be a real iconic piece in the collection. This is an interior of our 1914 parlor car, also operated on the Santa Fe Railway. This is completely restored. We're very proud of this one. Okay. We also have a lot of small supportive three-dimensional items in our collection. This is a telegraphy set that was donated to us not too many years ago. So we have a lot of supporting small pieces in the collection. Okay. A railway clock off the Santa Fe. We're not all Santa Fe, but we do have a lot of pieces, as I mentioned earlier. Beautiful old clock with a different dial on it. We also have a lot of signage, advertising pieces, and maps, as well as manuscripts and photographs. We have over 30,000 photographs in our collection, images ranging from daguerreotypes to glass plate negatives to Kodachrome slides, prints, and of course, a lot of it is being digitized today. We also have a lot of pieces online through the University of North Texas that's available for research called the Portal to Texas History. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the priorities for us is to build a cover over the entire collection. So these are some images of what we envision that to look like. Okay. We had a company in Dallas design what would be the train shed for us. We wanted an open truss design that was period style, that was befitting of the heritage and the era of our rolling stock, something that kind of fit nicely in context. Okay. So this is what that will look like. Roughly, there'll be a few little design changes since these renderings were done. But again, the open truss concept, the whole structure will be open. It will not be climate controlled. It'll be sort of abutted to our main building, which will be all climate controlled. It'll be at the foot of this structure eventually. Okay. Very ambitious, but this is a high priority. And like I mentioned earlier, we'll start our capital campaign probably later this year to build the structure. We're just about finished with all of our trackage. The other aspect of the museum is a model train exhibit called Traintopia. We gave it its own brand within the museum brand, and it's been very successful. This was a gift by a family in North Dallas. The city of Frisco provided space in that large building that was adjacent to our site, since it's been repurposed for a cultural facility. Okay. And Traintopia has been very successful for us. It's been a wonderful revenue generator for us, in addition to the outside experience that people have viewing the rolling stock. This is kind of a layout of what that model train layout looks like. It's a G scale, mostly LGB model trains, and it's a wonderful indoor year-round component that complements what we do outside. Okay. Just a couple of views of Traintopia on the inside. It's a magnificent exhibit. It cost $1 million to construct. It was in somebody's home at one point in time. A nice shot of the hotel on the layout. Okay. All right. So here we are. We're under construction. These are fairly recent views showing what we're doing today. That's our engineer, Rick Lunsford. We're going over some plans there. Still very much a work in progress. Okay. This is our shop building that we just completed. This building's less than a year old. And this is where we'll actually do major repairs to the rolling stock, running repairs, restoration, painting, and so forth. The building is 108 feet by 30 feet with a little outcropping to cover our equipment. The Santa Fe letters that are on the building were just put up. Those are vintage. Those were from the 1950s, from a structure that Santa Fe demolished back in the 1990s. We actually saved the lettering off of it. Okay. Those blue striped cars are cars that we bought from the commuter operation up in Chicago called Metra. We use those as classrooms. This is the interior of the building, and this is the Texlan, the car that we just saw earlier, undergoing some roof repairs inside the shop. We literally put it in there within about 20 minutes of putting the last roof panel on because it so desperately needed to go undercover. Okay. Currently, we are pouring the concrete platforms in between the exhibit tracks. This is called the midway. This is the midsection that will all be covered by a train shed eventually. This was a huge undertaking to put down all this concrete. This is about 600 feet long and 50 feet wide, and it had to be one continuous pour. It took over 14 hours to pour this section of concrete. That was actually a very hot day in Texas when this took place. Okay. And of course, our major fundraising events, we also host Day Out with Thomas. This is just a snapshot of operations today. We partner with the city of Grapevine and the Grapevine Vintage Railroad. This is a major fundraiser for us. I'm sure everybody's familiar with Thomas. Okay. We do special events on site. We are very much open, even though we're under construction. We just had our dinner in the diner event. This is a 1937 Katy dining car, Missouri, Kansas, Texas dining car. We've sold out the event. It's always very popular. And of course, we do a lot of school programs, all of our educational programs. We do 43 elementary schools, 17 middle schools, and 11 high schools in the Frisco School District alone. We do all 3rd grade, 7th grade, and some high school programs at our museum. We're very much education driven. Okay, you can just kind of scroll through these. This is our ethnic studies program that covers African American history and the role of the Pullman Porters in the civil rights movement in the U.S. Very well received by the schools. That we could develop this program at their request. Good program. Okay. And we also branded our Metra commuter cars as an educational facility. We call it Streamliner, and that's an acronym for Science, Technology, Railroads, Education, Art, and Math. So those cars are actually branded as an educational destination for the schools. Okay. Okay, just keep going. Almost finished. We also do outreach into the schools. We take our technology programs into the school district and into the classrooms. This is called Mindbender. We do this. It's a technology program where we introduce steam and internal combustion technology into the schools. Okay. So this is a drone view. This is actually not current. We actually have done a lot more construction since this was shot, but you can see that we went from something that was written down on a piece of paper as a sketch to something that's much more physical and tangible as this museum continues to be built out. This doesn't look like much, but it's actually a lot of work. And the programming behind it and what we are delivering to the community is living up to our development agreement that we have with the city. So we're very proud of this. It's actually much further along than what this view shows, but you can see it's actually in the flesh now. It's not just a concept. Okay. So as we wrap it up, we do have another phase coming. So we're very excited to keep on building and finish out this museum. It'll be the Center for Transportation Technology in all of the Southwest when it's completed. And Manny, I think there's just one more closing slide. That's it. All right. Well, that's a lot. I appreciate everybody listening. I'm happy to answer any questions if there's any time left.
Yeah, I mean, Bob, I think this is one of the best presentations we have had, and there's so much detail in bringing your, I mean, you have put your heart and your life's work and soul and effort into this museum, and we do have a lot of questions and a lot of positive feedback as well. So I'm not sure how much we can cover here, but let me just try to take the more important ones.
Okay.
I'll start from the reverse order. So Aparna is asking, what is the cost at which maybe perhaps your second phase has come up?
Okay. Well, our initial phase was 1 million, and that was funding received from the city of Frisco. As I mentioned earlier, they have since given through some of their agencies, their Economic Development Corporation and their Community Development Corporation, they've given us about another million in addition to that first million. Plus, we've received almost 2 million in private contributions. So we're right around close to 4 million where we are now. The building campaign will be much, much more extensive. You know, we're looking at probably between 7 and 10 million, maybe higher, to actually build the train shed and launch the next phase. But we're at about 4 million now.
Okay. A lot of positive feedback, Bob. So Ms. Vinita Srivastava, who's the Executive Director, Heritage, has mentioned that yours is definitely a temple of transport, which is a powerful thought. And she's asking whether all the documents that you had highlighted, are these available in the public domain?
Yes, most of them are. If you go online to historictrains.org, you can read about the past, the present, and the future of this project. We have a few drawings that are still proprietary that we haven't released yet that are very exciting. We're going to launch those as part of the building campaign, but most of these documents can be found online. If there's something in particular that you don't see, let me know.
Sure. And then Mr. Raghunandan has mentioned that it's such an amazing account, and if you could move some Indian buildings instead of demolishing them, and so on and so forth. And then it was all about meticulous planning and whatever that could be seen. And Mr. Vikash Singh has stated that it's a great presentation from your end, excellent case study. Even the McKinsey or BCG guys could not have done it better, is what he has mentioned.
Well, thank you. Very appreciate that.
Yeah, and then a lot more of positive feedback. And then there is an interesting question on whether any American presidents have visited your museum.
Oh, that's a good question. I know for the 1936 Centennial State Fair, the centennial of the state of Texas, Franklin Roosevelt visited Fair Park, and there was a railroad exhibit there, but it wasn't ours. It predated ours in 1936. Now, we do have some connections to presidents in that Harry Truman campaigned from the rear of the Texland when he was running for senator. That was Harry Truman. One of our cars was actually on Franklin Roosevelt's funeral train, in 1945? And then, of course, the GG1 Electric pulled Robert Kennedy's funeral train in 1968. So we do have some connections there. Okay.
And Mr. Bahadur has asked, did the original site have an objection to your museum moving out to a new location?
The site in Dallas where we
were, the Fair Park, yeah.
Oh yes, that was met with quite a bit of anger by a few people within the city of Dallas. Dallas is very sensitive to the surrounding suburbs, kind of cherry picking things and moving them out of Dallas. And our move, once it was announced, we vetted all of that very carefully. We didn't want to surprise anybody with the city of Dallas because we had a good run there and we had a lot of support, but when we announced that we were moving to Frisco, It was right after Frisco had also pulled the soccer team out of Dallas and moved it up there. So there was quite a bit of angst over that. So we had a few within city government that were very angry that we were moving out of Dallas. And they actually, he initiated a lawsuit and said, okay, if you're going to move, we want you out now. That was not the sentiment of 99% of the people in Dallas and the city government. Most people felt like it was a good move for us and wished us well, but he initiated this lawsuit. So while we're actually planning the move and executing the move and building new facilities, we had to fight a lawsuit literally behind our back. That took a lot of staff time. That gave me a lot more gray hair. But in the end, the city councilman that filed that lawsuit was just trying to grandstand. He ran for mayor. He finished dead last in the mayoral election. The city dropped the suit. Everybody made up, and we were on our way. So, and a lot of people think we were thrown out of Dallas. We were not thrown out of Dallas. We had a good run there. We were getting cultural funding. It was just a couple of people that got mad and decided to make an example out of us once we announced the move, but it was all resolved, no problems.
Thanks, Bob. Handing it over to Mr. Singh. Yeah.
Mani, let this be the end now. Yes, thank you.
It was very much my pleasure.
Thank you, Bob. It was excellent.
Thank you. It's very much my pleasure. I'm honored that you asked me to speak. If I can be of service to you in the future, please let me know.